so we know Greg's not in attendance, and then Larry was a maybe.
Right.
So I think
So
we're at
good to go?
6:30, so we can start whenever you're
All right.
ready.
Good evening. Seeing as how it's 6:30, we'll get the Plan Commission for the Village of Oregon meeting started. Could I get a roll call, please?
Van Campen,
Here.
Bano,
Here.
Molzon,
Here.
Meyer,
Here.
Smithback,
Here.
Holda,
Here.
and Mar is possibly going to come a little later. Mojeski's out and Schnelly's out tonight.
All right, we have quorum, so we'll move forward. Thank you. First is the public appearances. At this time, we'd like to take the opportunity to welcome anybody in the audience.
I want to get the minutes.
Oh,
Do we miss a minute?
oh, we could do that too.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
That's what I usually forget. That's why.
At this time, I'd like to make a motion for approval of the July 6th, 2023 meeting minutes, please.
So moved. Moved to approve.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Eric. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Now we'll move on to public appearances. And at this time, we'll have the community input. This is a chance for anybody in the audience to speak on a topic that is or is not on the agenda. We please ask that you try to keep it to about 3 minutes or less. We will not take action on this, but if there is a need to, we can push it onto another agenda item or into a different meeting. Is there anybody that would like to speak on something? Seeing none, we'll move on. Item 5 is communication and miscellaneous business. None. We have no unfinished business. So 7A, public hearing regarding the proposed creation of tax incremental district number 6, the proposed boundaries of the district and the proposed project plan for the district. FYI, the Joint Review Board will be meeting on August 3rd, yada, yada. At this time, I will open the public hearing. And could I please get a staff report?
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Dave and get his presentation pulled up here.
Good evening, everybody. Is this working good? Doesn't sound as loud as yours.
We're just pushing buttons over here. Try to get real close. Yeah,
That's
there you
good.
go.
Okay. There's a couple of things in your packet. One is the presentation that I'm going to go through, and really that's a high-level version of the project plan instead of going through the bigger document. If you read through it and there's certain questions that you have that I can answer on the project plan, we can do that after I get done going through the overview. So working off the screen that Elise has up there, the first schedule is the dates. We actually met with the JRB earlier today, introduced the project plan to them, did the same presentation you're about to hear. They had some decent questions about things like, let me just grab that quick. One of the things was asking, as far as the but-for test with a TIF district, what were we really trying to prove in here? And because we have a developer that has asked for TIF assistance, we did the village board ordered a pro forma review, and we were able to provide the village with basically the support that showed that there was a financial gap and that there was a need for TIF for this project to have to actually go through. The other thing would be was there another part to that? Was it because the land hadn't developed as fast as maybe the village wanted to? And Martin actually sent out a memo later on to the entire Joint Review Board just to make sure that they understood that, yes, there has been some lag in how that property is developed, that you've had some specialized type of zoning or whatever to bring in certain types of things, and that really this is a property that's probably in the works for about the last 20 years. So, even though the project plan didn't state that there was an issue with that, the but-for test usually has something to do with, is there a financial need? Is there a reason why the village wants this to develop in a more timely manner? And so we were able to provide them information already after the meeting to kind of nail down their, what they need to know for making their judgment when we meet with them on October 3rd. And then the other question was what was the makeup of the project? There's 58 apartments and 12 townhomes. And so that was really the gist of the questions that we got from the Joint Review Board. Next is what we're doing here tonight. You open the public hearing. After you close that, we'll actually be asking you to approve a resolution if you feel that this is something you want to recommend to the village board. There's one item when you do your motion, if you decide to do that, is that we don't have the opinion of the village attorney yet, so you would want to make that motion contingent upon that opinion. The next step, if you push this onto the village board, is that they would consider this on October 21st, which is another what they call Dave Fest here at the village, where I get more than one agenda item on a night. And so the village board gets a lovely chance of hearing me multiple times that day. And then the last thing, even though it says within 45 days, we actually do have a date of October 5th, which the county has set up a date where we go through not only this project being potentially approved, but we also give them a rundown of TIF 3 through 5 that day as well. So if you're interested in how your TIF districts are doing, that's the day that we actually go through that with the Joint Review Board. Moving on to the next page. Is everybody familiar with how TIF works? Because otherwise I can do a quick TIF 101. It's really up to you. I can save you some time, but that's up to you.
Why don't you go ahead and do it for people that might be in the audience?
Okay. So the schedule on the screen really shows how a TIF district goes through time. Right now, with this TIF district, we've got, basically it'll end up being a one parcel TIF district, but the taxes that are collected on that parcel right now go to all of the taxing districts. So that's that blue line that you see up there that says baseline property value. All of that value goes to, schools, county, technical college, village. As we, if you approve this, the creation date will be in August 21st of 2023 will be the magical date once the village board considers it and approves it. At that point, anything that gets constructed on that property above that value that was there when we created it goes towards paying things such as the municipal revenue obligation or the pay-go obligation that we have with the developer that I think you're probably working on the development agreement with. So as that value comes in, what we have agreed to give them an incentive to help them get their project completed gets collected, and we pay that out until they reach that amount that was approved by the village board, which was basically a loan of about 1.5 million with some interest on top of that. When we get to the point where we've collected everything that we need to pay off the obligations that we have in here, whether it's that, or if the value comes in better and we can maybe improve the street or something like that, that we can, potentially close that TIF district. Now in Wisconsin, at the current point, you can actually stay open. You can close the district, but stay open one more year to collect another increment and use that towards what's called workforce housing or affordable housing. So it's possible that when we get to the date that we terminate the need for the district, that you might be able to put that in another fund and help do things like plan for future housing that has affordable issues or benchmarks you have to live by, or setting up even a plan. The money can be used towards even planning for that. So after the TIF closes, which then we're in the green bar over there, that value all of a sudden comes on to the tax rolls, and all the other taxing districts can then start taxing that. But in that purple time is when we're collecting that and paying, we're using all the taxes and paying for that obligation that we've agreed to, and that the Joint Review Board, made up of those members, has agreed to basically sign on as your partner to let that money go towards that project. Is that any questions? Okay. So as you can see on there, the creation date is would be August 1st or 21st of 2023. The termination year would be August 21st, 2043 if we really needed to stay open that long. If the TIF does well, you may not have to stay open that long. The expenditure period, meaning anything that you might approve in this district, is August 21st of 38. So at that point, you can't spend money on things like improving roads or making more municipal revenue obligations to developers. That's the time where all we can really do is, if we took on any debt to put an improvement in, or we have administration, certain fees that we have to pay every year, we can collect those up until that last date. I'm gonna grab a water. I talked so much today, my voice is kind of starting to die out on me. I've been on the phone almost all day. It's kind of crazy. So in this case, even though the closure year is 2043, based on the timing of when this TIF is created, if the village really needed to, there is one more revenue year that can be collected in 2044, based on because of the date of the creation. Next slide. Okay. So I think you probably all know where this is. Right now, it's as of 1/1/23, it was, or 1/1/23, it was 2 parcels. There's a CSM ongoing, as you probably know, where this will become 1 parcel, and this is where the 58 apartments and 12 townhomes will be constructed to get that value that we were collecting in that purple section that I showed you before. You know, really the TIF is being created to have an additional financing tool. You know, the developers provided information on that they're obtaining low-income housing tax credits, that they'll have a mortgage. You know, they'll probably use the municipal revenue obligation as a way to monetize that and have that be something that the bank can loan out to them and help to construct this project. So that's really the purpose of this district, is to help them be able to finance their project. As far as required findings, we do not have any newly platted residential. In a mixed-use district, if you have newly platted, you have to be below a certain percentage of the acreage, be newly platted residential, and then everything else has to be either commercial or industrial or manufacturing. In this case, we have, based on the opinion by the village attorney, we do not have any newly platted, so that is not an issue. We don't have to worry about that benchmark. And we do have the 2 uses, which is commercial and residential. There is a commercial aspect of the structure. Next page. Not a lot of items that are in here for projects. We have the development incentives that have been vetted by our firm to make sure that they were actually not over enriching the developer, and then administration that would be ongoing for the 20 years. Obviously, if we don't go 20 years, we wouldn't use that much of an administrative budget. The next page is really the value that was determined that this would value out at is about 8.9 million, and it gets broken up based on what the developer said is about 25% the first year, 50%, and then 25% will be how the value comes in. And then on the next page is just how we calculate the tax increment. The value comes in. There's a tax rate that's related to the other taxing districts. It's on a sheet called the PC 202 form, and you take the value times the tax rate to get that value. If everything happened the way it is on here, we would collect about $3.4 million. However, with a big increase in the equalized value of the village, we expect that tax rate to come down some. So I think when we actually go to the village board, we'll update this with a tax rate that's more like $18.25. That'll lower it a little bit, but the cash flow still works. We'll still close successfully. The next page is that cash flow. That first column is basically a regurgitation of that orange column that I showed you on the last page. The municipal revenue obligation is how much, the 1.5 million that I talked about before, and how we'll pay that out to the developer. It also depends on how much value they put in. So if the value comes out to what they said it was going to be, you know, they'll get, I think it's 90%, 95% of the, I don't have it in front of me. But there's a certain percent of the increment that goes towards that payment. And once they get to that 1.5 million of principal, then the village is done, which you can see happens at about 2042. We'll have enough money really to pay off that last payment, and that's what we're projecting the closing year to be. I would say with the tax rate change, we'll still be pretty close to being 2042. It might slip into 2043 with that lower tax rate, but it looks like the project will bring in enough money to cash flow this. That's all I have for this. If you have any questions on the actual project plan that maybe you went through in some detail, maybe right before you turned out the light at night, I'm happy to answer that for you.
Anybody have any questions? None? I've got 2. Just so I understand, you had mentioned something about the old TIF and about how the funding or the incentive to get development to happen wasn't happening as quick as it was expected. So was that TIF retired or is this an overlay TIF on an existing TIF?
I
or-
don't think this is a TIF at all. This is a brand new, there wasn't an old
There was
TIF.
no TIF on this property?
No.
Okay,
And we certainly, I don't think, we ever really discussed creating a TID out here unless there was a project that required it. So kind of what happened first is North Point came forward. Obviously, they've been through a couple years of the WIDA funding and getting a no the first year, and then last year they did get that funding. So they said there's now this gap. They actually had received some of that affordable workforce housing funding from a previous TID 2 years ago, but returned that and said, we think TIF would be a better solution here. So they did actually the full but-for analysis before we went through the TID creation. But yeah, this is a brand new TID, not overlaid. It would just
Okay.
be these two parcels, which will soon be combined to one.
all right, thank you. And the second question is the residential element that you had touched on, that there is a commercial, the multifamily and the residential. I'm assuming that the TIF would go to the developer for those individual properties, correct? It doesn't go to the people, or is that a lease back kind of thing?
I believe the commercial space would be
I'm talking about
leased.
the residential, the single family or the duplexes or the fourplexes, whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, the apartments would be leased, of course. I would, is there ownership in the townhomes?
No. So this is just for the North Point project, none of the other Oregon Parks duplexes or anything like that. So it would all be rentals. It would all be managed, owned by North Point Development and then managed. I think they typically use, maybe Oakbrook Management or a similar company, but yeah, so it would all be rentals. There's a 58 unit multifamily building. We looked at the SAP, I think about 2 months ago here. So that has kind of a mixed use apartment building, about 3,200-ish square feet of commercial space with that drive-through on the west side of the lot. And then further east on the lot, there's 12 3-bedroom townhomes. Those are all rentals, so all of the
Okay, that's
the
what I
TIF
was-
would just be going to the
okay,
developer.
that's what I was wondering about, is those units themselves, if they were individually owned
Nope.
but they are leased. So, got it, thank you. Anybody else have questions?
I have one question. Is this a unique situation? I understand this would be the 6th TIF district for Oregon. Is this a unique situation where we only have one developer? I'm used to districts that are areas of land that many people can apply for. Is there an example of another situation? Is it the hotel that we have in town?
I don't think in the village
This-
we've done just a single project.
Yeah, this is really your first one-off type of a TIF. It's not unusual in Wisconsin. When you've
Okay.
when you have a project that can cash flow on its own, then you can take this on and just do one parcel. I don't think there's anything that says that you couldn't amend this district and add territory if there's other development that come into it that maybe would help you actually improve some of the roads and things. Obviously, with the low-income housing component, they usually need most of the increment to make this work. And I think that's pretty typical compared to tell me what the other one is that's in TIF 5, I think?
Like Adam Coyle's apartments.
No, it's Lake.
Oh, Lakestone, Prairie
Lakestone.
Brook, that's in TID 4.
Yeah, so in TIF 4, we have Lake Stone and basically most of, if not all of the increment that project is bringing in is actually going towards their project just because they're hard to cash flow when they're low income like this.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to public comments. Anybody in the audience have any questions or comments about this? Seeing none, we'll move on to planning commission comments. We've already touched on some. Anybody else have anything?
Nope.
Nope. All right, I will close the public hearing. And I would like to consider the possible action on Resolution 1223-05 to establish the boundaries of and approving the project plan for tax incremental District Number 6 with the caveat for the final opinion of the village attorney to be applied to this, as well as, was it the August 3rd village board meeting?
August 28th will be the.
21st.
21st, sorry.
August 21st.
I have
village
another
board
one on the
meeting.
28th, so.
Is there a mo-
So moved.
There's a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thorough. Have a
Moving on to
rest.
the next item, review and possible approval of a SIP for the fourplex at Lot 8 in the Oregon Parks duplex replat. Applicant is Altera Homes. Elise, would you like to give us a little background on this?
Yes, so, I don't think we have the applicant here. Altair Homes, did a comp plan amendment earlier this year. You remember for a couple of the Oregon Parks duplex lots, I think they own 4 corner lots and did the comp plan amendment to allow, a fourplex, so an over-under, not a side-by-side townhome situation like, on Lot 3, just north of Beehive, but, I have kind of a concept plan here and their floor plans, but, this is just kind of following up on the comp plan amendment. I believe he said that he may not end up putting fourplexes on all 4 of these lots, maybe just 2 of them, but at this point, just moving forward with plans for Lot 8. I'll kind of show where that is on the map, but this meets all of the GDP requirements that were put in place for the duplexes as well, so still kind of fits within that envelope. But this is on the corner of Liberty Park Drive and Oregon Center Drive, so kind of the southeastern corner of all of that replat area. So 2 of the garages will exit off of Oregon Center Drive, 2 will exit off of Liberty Park Drive, and then 2 units on the ground floor, 2 units above. He didn't include a cut sheet of the siding, but, said that it would be, kind of an earth tone. So not something that I was able to include in the packet, but here's one side of the duplex or the fourplex with those 2, garages on the side, and then also the other side for those other 2 units. So floor plans, everything in here, but, consistent with the comp plan, that change we did a couple months ago. And then a landscaping plan here as well. Recommending approval, don't have any conditions on this one.
All right. Is there anybody here besides staff to speak to that? No? All right, any questions from the Plan Commission? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the SIP for the fourplex at Lot 8 Oregon Parks duplex replat for the applicant of Altera Homes.
So moved.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Item C, review and possible recommendation to the village board of a 0 lot line certified survey map at 740, 746 Thompson Drive. Elise, would you like to give us a little background on that?
Yes, so these are our bread and butter, it seems like now, these 0 lot line duplexes. This is on Thompson Drive, just behind Walgreens area. But there was a couple of really minor, more labeling requests by our engineer. And so the newer version of that CSM has addressed all those comments that came in after the packet went out, though. So that revised CSM will reach the board packet in 2 weeks. But no concerns here on this one, meets all of our lot size requirements, frontage requirements for 0 lot line duplexes.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody here in the audience that would like to speak on this? Seeing none. Plan Commission, have any questions, comments? Seeing none, I'd take a recommendation for approval to the village board of a 0 lot line certified survey map at 740 and 746 Thompson Drive.
So moved.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion carries. Item D. This is the application for a general development plan and certified survey map located at 5227 County Highway CC. The applicant is Regency Property Management. The item was tabled from our last Plan Commission meeting and referred to this meeting. So in your packet is a staff memo, and why don't we have Elise kind of fill us in with that and give us some background?
Sure. So as you all remember, last time we met, I think the overall comments about the GDP and the plan itself, you all seemed relatively in favor of, the density and the design. height and everything proposed by Regency for that multifamily development. But there were some questions largely centered around the access to the property and kind of an ongoing private property dispute. So the motion was to table and have the developer come back and have some resolution. So since that time, I know the private property groups have spoken with each other, but no progress has been made in terms of anything that we've received for resolving that. Another issue Martin kind of identified and we dug into a little bit further is less of a private property issue, but more of a public property issue, whereas the current plan that was shown relies on access through a town parcel. Currently not any thing before us that, no request for annexation for Mr. Fink's parcel at this time. So, kind of looking at, I don't think we have the authority to approve a project that has improvements on a town parcel. And, county obviously oversees Town of Oregon's zoning, but also with change of use to the highway, kind of learning a little bit more about what the highway department's process looks like. Essentially, the developer, should they move forward, would have to apply for a change of use permit, and then they evaluate, is that driveway still sufficient to serve, the proposed number of units here versus 2 single-family homes. So we outlined that in a memo. We've also spoken with Roger Lane, who's the Dane County zoning administrator, kind of just clarify what I heard in a phone conversation, had him confirm that, so that's been sent to the developer as well. So he has a to-do list before, and we've made it very clear that we're not interested in bringing that back to Planning Commission or Village Board until we have some forward progress on those fronts and can kind of get some of these outstanding issues resolved. So Martin's recommendation, after we kind of talked about where things stand, is not to table to a particular meeting, just not knowing how long this will take. So just to table until those issues are resolved and he's able to come back with a resolution.
Seems like a logical approach.
So, do you want to postpone indefinitely then, or?
That was Martin's recommendation, yeah, that we don't call out a particular meeting, otherwise we'll
Yeah,
be having it on every agenda, so I won't bring
Right.
it forward again until.
that's my motion. Sorry, go ahead.
My only question, though, is, last time there was some conversation about can we table something indefinitely? Can we?
Well,
I think
you can postpone indefinitely, which essentially kills it.
Okay,
so I think we're saying here, we're postponing until he's
Okay.
resolved the outstanding issues as outlined in the staff
Okay.
letter.
all right.
But yeah,
So the GDP and SI, or the CSM is essentially gonna die along with this recommendation to postpone. Because
We
we're postponing.
could do this as no action taken.
no action taken, okay. Yeah. I think,
not
we obviously had the public hearing before, depending on if there were changes to the application, how much time has passed, we may decide if this comes forward to kind of start from scratch with a new public hearing too, so. But yeah, if you want to.
So we could leave this as no action taken, and then depending on how quickly they return, we could just do another public hearing.
Okay, so we'll just move on
Take
to the
no
agenda.
action,
Yeah.
yep, okay.
Is that acceptable to everybody? Is everybody
I
understand?
just want to make sure, I think your question's a good one, as I think of revision of some state statutes, and we don't want to be in a position where we haven't taken action within a certain time period. So maybe that's something to run by the attorney, just to make sure.
Sure, yeah, this is Martin's recommendation in terms of how to word the tabling, but yeah, we can certainly check on that. I think also, because these properties, no annexation petition has been filed, we're essentially kind of doing him a favor by moving the GDP and a CSM discussion ahead of annexation. So, until the property is annexed, I don't think even just the planning commission agenda item is really active. But yeah, we can certainly double check on that. If we need to bring it back and restate your kind of position, we can do that at the next meeting.
I think, in my opinion, that's probably the prudent thing to do, is just let this thing sit until we get some more clarification. Is that
Just
fair?
take no action.
All right, so no action.
Okay.
And we'll just move on to the agenda. Item E, review the draft of the 2024-2033 comprehensive plan presented by planning and consultant Sonia Cruzel, I'm sorry,
Creasel.
Kriesel. I've been called worse too, so, from Vanderwall and Associates. Please, Sonia, come up and give us a little bit of insight.
And those for presenting the PowerPoint, should I do that from my computer?
Yeah, I can move the
I sent it to you by
HDMI.
email too, whatever's
Okay.
easier.
If you want to control things, maybe we can try with that, or I can download it and we can take my mouse. So let's see if this one's good. No, it's
Okay, maybe
Yeah.
that's.
Yeah. You can be one of us.
Facilities.
You'll be able to see her, Josiah. Okay. Good. And then the other side.
Right. Good evening. Thanks for having me back. It's my first time at your new facilities. Looks very nice. So I'm just here providing an update on our comprehensive plan update progress. So I have some slides to kind of help facilitate the conversation. Feel free to jump in with questions or comments at any time. We know that the draft documents provided to you are long, and so this is intended to be fairly high-level overview to kind of help get the main points across to you and to highlight the areas where we would like a little bit of feedback, or where you might want to provide some more specific feedback. Just as a reminder of what this is, and for anyone in the public, the village is updating the comprehensive plan and at the same time updating the park and recreation plan. I'm not commenting on that second document tonight. That'll be before the park board next week, Wednesday, for a review of their first draft one of that plan. But we kicked this off back in February, and then through March, we took care of a lot of the upfront public input opportunities. So we did focus groups, we did the public visioning workshop that was well attended at the Old Village Hall, as well as kickoff meetings with the Plan Commission and staff and village board to kind of get some of that initial feedback. After obtaining that, then the next couple of months were spent drafting this draft one document that's before you tonight. Here, we're going to review draft one and get your feedback. We'll take that and compile it into the next version. That next version will also kind of be the next step in document formatting. You'll get some more graphics and things within the plan as well. And then moving into fall, as you approach draft 3, we really call that the final draft, and that's what would go before the public in the open house to get their final input on before we move into the adoption process later at the end of the year. So with that being said, just a review here of some of the major things that influence changes in the comprehensive planning document. So we're looking at the village's population growth and what that means for new land demand and what you want to project out for your land use needs over the next 20 years. We gave a little bit of a preview of this back at our February kickoff meetings. So just to reiterate that, we're projecting adding almost 6,000 new residents over the next 20-year period. And that was based on projections that we discussed with the Plan Commission and the Village Board that reflects the period of growth from 1990 through 2010. So some really robust periods of growth during that time frame for the village, and this just continues that trend. So we continue to see high demand. Likewise, household growth. The DOA projects for the Village of Oregon a slight decrease in household size, and that's very common throughout the region and the state and nationally to see that number start to go down as people have less kids and as populations age. But in discussions with staff, and our opinion as well, we thought, in Oregon, there's still very strong demand for families and family housing. So rather than show a decrease in that, we found a compromise and kept it as a consistent household size growth over the next 20-year period. So with that, we ultimately are projecting adding about 2,000 new households. Then through our calculations, which are described further in the appendix, it results in the projected land use demand. And you'll see that as the last bullet point here, 1,100 new acres needed by 2045. So just for your information, some of the calculations that go into that number, it's the population, the household growth, and then some assumptions, such as a 6-unit per acre density, as well as kind of figuring in how much would be residential, how much would be commercial, and how much would be allocated towards infrastructure like stormwater and parks. Then there's a flexibility factor applied, which essentially doubles what the land use demand is, because if you were to go through all of the land that was needed, that assumes that every property owner is willing to sell for development, or that everything happens along those lines, and that we know that's not always the case. So that's where that flexibility factor comes in. And your future land use plan then reflects at least this much new acreage for potential development. The other big thing that starts to craft and guide this new draft of your plan is a lot of the public feedback that we heard. So I think there were some really, really good discussions. The focus groups I thought were fun and lively, and like I said, good attendance at the workshop. This is just a real quick snip of some of that feedback. People wanted to keep the small town feel. They really valued the school system and open space, but at the same time want to continue to encourage diversity in those recreation spaces, whether that's a new indoor facility or continuing to prioritize active sports, but give space as well to passive rec or other people that aren't involved in those active groups. I want to make sure that there's still a growth area for business and commercial. So we again talk about the Highway 14 interchange, encourage housing diversity, housing affordability, and senior housing. So there are a few different ways that we start to address that in the plan. Continuing to support walkability and retail in the downtown, and then balancing not just new growth on the edges of the village, but also infill and redevelopment. Finally, a lot of feedback on addressing sustainability issues and environmental considerations like flooding or climate change, and then finally supporting placemaking and arts and culture initiatives. Again, stop me at any time. This is just a real quick overview of what's changed. So to give you an orientation on the document formatting, it does look quite different than your existing plan. One piece is the main body of the plan, and all of the data and the tables and the inventory type information was pulled out and moved into the appendix. We do this to kind of keep that main plan a little bit shorter. It gets more to the point. People don't have to sift through inventories of all of the plans that affect Oregon in order to find recommendations. And it puts all of that in the appendix so that people can still refer to it. Makes it more user-friendly. In addition, there's completely revamped goals, objectives, and strategies. This reflects the public input that we obtained. And then the last few bullet points are some other key changes. You'll see new future land use categories. And in your meeting information for tonight, there's a little 4-page PDF. You'll see a translation table, and that includes your old future land use categories with the new ones, and then it explains what changed and why.
So I do have a question on that. Will these new categories supersede our existing, or will they only apply to future development?
It will be completely new, so the old ones will go away and they won't have any effect on future development. The zoning, though, for clarification, does not change. So anyone who has a current zoning on their property, they'll still be able to use that to guide what they can do today. What
Okay.
the future land use map does is guide when a zoning change happens. What will the future land use category be that recommends and advises that zoning change?
Okay.
Okay. Continuing on, new implementation action table. So this is specific things that the village can undertake over the next 20 years to implement the plan goals. New vision statement and executive summary. So going back to those new future land use categories, I wanted to pull out just 3 of them here for your information. Taking the first bullet point, what used to be a land use category of very strictly single family or 2-family or mixed residential, those have now been combined into these categories called low scale and mid scale. So this has the effect of generalizing things a little bit more. So if you have a parcel that was recommended for 2-family and someone wanted to do a 4-unit, you would have to go through a comp plan amendment process every single time to consider that. So with the village's goals of housing affordability and diversity and that sort of thing, this is one of those ways that we can change that process, yet still have some guidance on the type of housing that we'll see in these areas. The second bullet point isn't too different. So this is regarding your district, your category that was called planned neighborhood. We still have that in the new plan. In the old plan, there were these specific percentages. So if someone came in with a planned neighborhood, let's say Viridian, and they wanted to do a percentage of single family, 2-family, and some multifamily, they had to meet these percentages that were specifically prescribed in the plan. In the proposed draft, it removes those percentages. Again, allowing a little bit more flexibility, still asking for that good mix of housing units, but sometimes the developer might come in with a little bit more of one category or the other, and that causes some procedural hiccups. Ultimately, might still meet your goals. But again, that's the point of removing those percentages.
Sonia, when we did that, I remember that the percentage-based calculations was based on the existing makeup of Oregon itself. And if we go to this removal of that percentage-based, how do we still maintain that sort of approach to giving that same flavor of housing types?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good question, and it's one way that you can do it is when these requests come forward, they're usually looking at a rezone. The zoning category that most implements planned neighborhood is planned development. So those are all negotiated, and they're kind of create your own. And the village has a lot of legislative discretion over what that looks like. So you could still, if you were like, the village is largely this proportion, we want to maintain that character, that is something that you would have the ability to apply to the zoning. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just to say, I think part of the reason we wanted to bring this up as one of the main points that was changed is to have this discussion, not necessarily tonight, but ongoing of was the previous existing or the existing today makeup of land use types in Oregon the right ratio? Just because it's the way that things kind of have developed, is that the way that we want things to continue to develop? So do we want to continue to have, you know, as much reliance on single family housing as we have in the past, understanding that, you know, that takes a greater amount of land to create, there's more infrastructure that's needed to support single family neighborhoods versus more dense development. I think also just finding that, for example, with Viridian neighborhood, they actually were over on the 2-family ratio slightly. I think it called for no more than 10% planned neighborhood for duplexes. It was like 11.2 or something, and generally in keeping with the ratio, but caused this, like you said, procedural hiccup of, you know, trying to justify that. I think they did a good job trying to, you know, disperse it across the neighborhood, and, you know, it's a different type of 2-family product because it's a twin home and they have a for sale type unit mix. But I think this, part of what we want to have this discussion, this is just kind of our recommendation based on all the feedback that we got, is maybe we don't need to live and die by this pie chart, but one, allow kind of the market to come to us as this is what we think is needed, this is what we think will do well in Oregon, and also still there's lots of opportunities to say, you know, here's planned neighborhood, we don't think that this balance is quite right. We'd like to see a little bit less reliance on multifamily, a little bit more townhomes or single homes or whatever it might be. But yeah, just kind of that, just because this is the way that things have been, you know, is that the type of mix that we would like to continue?
When do we discuss this? If not tonight, when do we?
I mean, I think tonight is a good part. We'll have a couple other opportunities for, you know, draft review, but I think the sooner the better if you want to dig into that particular item. That's what this time is for.
Candidly, for me personally, I like the pie chart. I like the percentage approach, but I understand the flexibility and then the change of the housing types that are required or desired now, with the costs that are escalating and the land types and home types. Another option might be to still do the pie chart, but give the flexibility of 3% either way on a land type use, so that it doesn't have to be a hard number, but that 11.2 isn't as big a deal if you can go up to 13. Now, if we find that we're always going up to 13, then yeah, maybe we need to consider taking another look at the pie chart. But it gives, I like it because it gives me something that the community input had always been. It was a bounce back kind of thing, a checkpoint. But it also maintained the expectation of what the Village of Oregon residents wanted, and that was to maintain that sort of single-family residence, small-town approach, and it was easy to sort of have a check that way.
I guess I have a little, I disagree with you a little bit there. I like the flexibility you're proposing. I think the developers have a better handle on the market than we do on predicting what they should do. And this allows that to happen. Yes, it doesn't necessarily follow the vision, but it follows the market. And we can react to that. So if it becomes too extreme one way or the other, as a planning commission in future developments, we can elect to say, no, we don't want this.
I agree with that. I think we need to have flexibility because people can't afford single-family homes the way they used to. I think people talk frequently about being priced out of Oregon, so I think as a planning commission member, it'd be nice to have rules that we could fall back on, but as a resident, I think it is helpful to have that flexibility.
All right.
Another comment I would say, I think this recommendation is also reflecting what we heard from the community this time around and recognizing that we have changed a lot in 10 years in terms of, you know, whether it's our politics or age or just the market has changed. We've been through a pandemic. We've been through, you know, a big change in the housing market from where we were, you know, 10 years ago. Dane County is only getting more desirable to live and less affordable too. So I think that's kind of what we heard from the community is that they want to have more housing choice and they would like, as people age, they'd like to stay in Oregon, and that doesn't mean being in a single family house. Not that there's anything wrong with single family housing, but recognizing too that I think a lot of the comments were about building up and not out, densifying infill development, and a lot of those opportunities, you know, don't always fit kind of the traditional single family model.
Okay. Seems
I
reasonable.
recall that 20 years ago when we did this, and I think it even involved a residential balance study so that we kind of saw that Oregon had this many percent homes, this many percent duplexes. You know, we all agreed that we want Oregon to have that small town feel and we don't want to dramatically shift one way or the other. So I recall that conversation and we put that in there for a reason, but when I look at the last 20 years and the types of development that we've had and how we've reacted to the market, and, you know, we had some real heartburn the first time we approved a project that was over 8 units per acre, you know, and now we're looking at projects that are many multiples of that. Things have changed. CARPC is demanding, you know, more density of our land use and stuff for their purposes, so I think we could get away from that and leave a little more flexibility in it.
Okay. Seems reasonable.
Okay, great feedback, thanks. Moving on to the last bullet point there, just another key future land use map change. You'll see a new land use category in the text, and it's called interchange, mixed use. So this is a customized land use category that's only mapped on this Highway 14 interchange area. And you'll see that color on the proposed future land use map. There are some alternatives that you could do. I think it was shown as planned mixed use in the last plan. You could also specifically put things on the map like general industrial or commercial, but at this point it would be an educated guess. Instead, we suggest creating this category to kind of allow for those detailed conversations to happen at some point in the future. So it recommends in the text that a neighborhood plan be done before applying specific land use categories. And the blend of uses is probably what you would expect to see based on conversations there in the past, but it describes commercial, some industrial, and some mixed use. So stepping aside from the land use categories themselves, this slide has a few bullet points on other kind of key recommendations or just key differences that we wanted to call out. So one of them is a new chapter that was not in your last plan called Quality of Life. In an earlier draft, it was called Livability, Sustainability, and Public Health. It's a little bit of a mouthful, so we shortened that down, working with staff to call it Quality of Life. But that's the type of content that you see in that chapter, because there was a lot of public input on those kinds of topics, sustainability, livability, and public health. It's not a requirement from the state statutes, but something that seemed customized and appropriate for the community. Again, the second bullet point is a new chapter, but the content itself is not new. It was just living inside the land use chapter in your last plan. So we just pulled it out to kind of clarify things a little bit, community character and design. A few recommendations. One is a climate action plan. Again, pointing these out just to note reflection of the input received. Climate action plan might be an aggressive recommendation in the nearer term. You could continue to work with other entities like Dane County and their similar planning document and efforts. But at some point in the future, if the village wanted to have specific metrics or goals in this realm, that's the type of document that could help guide those conversations. Another one is including an arts and culture plan as a recommendation. With all of the input and the energy around public art in the community, an arts and culture plan kind of goes beyond even just initial things and can start to strategize how you might have partnerships on these things or how you might encourage different types of public art and leverage different resources there. So we can talk about that more too if needed, but that's identified as a midterm recommendation. Updating the downtown plan. I know this one's been discussed so many different times, but so much has changed with the moving out here of the library and village hall. So I know that that's something that staff is discussing, and so that's continuing to be a recommendation in this plan. And then the implementation action table, if you had a chance to look at that at all, those are very specific things, so that's always something that we welcome feedback on. We talked about the category adjustments for land use. Now this slide talks about some more finer details of map adjustments. One is bullet point 1 we just talked about, the Highway 14 interchange. So this just sort of clarifies, where on the map that is. Circled in red, it's that big pink area for the interchange mixed use. Another change that you see on the draft future land use map is regarding the downtown and the land uses that occur around it. So this is again something that addresses that public input and what we're hearing from the community in terms of trends. Different scales of housing, growing within the current footprint of the village as much as possible, having good transitions of land uses, having a walkable downtown, maybe supporting more retail viability in the downtown. So in order to get at some of those goals, we recommend some land use changes that essentially creates a buffer. And the next slide might show it a little bit better. On the left is your existing future land use map, and then on the right is the proposed in the draft today, and that shows some changes outlined in red. South on Main Street, that triangular stretch was recommended for single-family in the future. It's shown here as that mid-scale land use. So this might allow for some two-family and kind of that increase in subtle density there. As you go east of Main Street, that entire block where I believe the parochial school is, you can see the blue on the left side. That's also shown the same way that I just described. And then north of that, I think it's Elm Street, has planned neighborhood, or planned mixed use frontage, that's the purple color, as a transition from commercial into that area. And then the going north of the downtown, 249 North Main is shown as mid-scale residential, knowing that it can accommodate some of the uses that the village just went through and recommended, as well as some of that other area around Grove Street.
Can you give us an example of what that might be?
So maybe Altera, one thing that just came through, I haven't seen that specifically, but they have two flats, right? So two flat duplex is something that would not have been allowed if you just recommended only single family, but by changing it to the mid-scale, you would have that ability to consider
So
a
still a
two-flat.
residential use,
Yeah.
but just higher densities.
Yeah, and another example, this might be a good time to give you guys an update if you haven't followed the village board meetings, but the proposals for our 249, 267 North Main Street site, the former new library site, the board made a decision last Monday to move forward. We had 5 respondents for that, move forward with North Point. They had a proposal for 24 workforce housing, 3-bedroom townhomes on the site, as well as a 3/4 acre park. So we're working through some of the initial steps with kind of a development agreement there and how the land would be divided and how the park would be developed and everything. But so townhomes will be what we will see, you know, as that plan moves forward and comes through reviews. That land use would be consistent if map stays as is with kind of a mid-scale intent.
The last area on the map that we wanted to point out is expanded a little bit further out of planned neighborhood areas compared to what was in the last plan. This goes back to one of the first slides I started with, kind of talking about projected land use demand. And this helps allow that flexibility if that growth were realized. I specifically highlighted 2 areas where there's a change on the northern red circle, kind of just squared off the recommended land use up to Highway CC. And then likewise on the south, it squared it off to Lincoln Road. So that's, again, the really high-level overview. What I touched on was formatting, new land use categories, a whole host of new strategies and recommendations, pulling out a couple of those for your attention, some specific map changes. Any other feedback, comments, questions are welcome on things I didn't touch on, or if this didn't make sense, or what you'd like to see in draft 2.
So I read your plan. I spent 2 evenings this week reading your plan. And the result of that is 5 pages worth of notes.
Okay.
And at the risk of ire of my fellow members of the board here, I won't go through all of those, but I'm happy to leave my notes with you. I do have page numbers indicated, and I think you can make sense of it. From a high point perspective, your plan is very well written. I applaud the inclusion of the 2 new chapters, quality of life, community character and design, elements that are hard to define, and I think you've done a good job with that. My biggest feedback with your plan is a lack of emphasis on interconnecting neighboring communities. And I understand it's our community that you're writing the plan for, but the plan promotes, as you call it, multimodal transportation. But the biggest frustration I feel with our community is We have no decent way into Madison. We have no interconnection. We've made some effort with the Rotary Bike Trail, but we still aren't connected. And when you get into Madison and how wonderful it is to get around by bike, and this is coming from my perspective as somebody who bikes a lot, I think your plan should emphasize a little bit more that, okay? The other area that I saw missing from your plan is a lack of emphasis on trees. Okay? There's a couple areas where you do say it. Downtown master plan in the call out, encourage landscaping, trees, plants, berms, and private lots. But I didn't find a lot of language about trees. And it brought up the question, why are we not a Tree City USA? And shouldn't that be in the plan as a goal? Now, I know there's some cost associated with it. I don't know if it was ever discussed in the past, but I would like to see some discussion on that. Particularly, I'll jump ahead, and then I do have a few things that I do want to bring up specifically. But there's a neat map in the appendix, the Urban Heat Index. And maybe we can look at that a little bit later, but trees would really help. And my frustration, I think we've lost the wisdom of the past, particularly on Main Street, which those communities were tree-lined communities. And we've lost the majority of our trees on the terrace. And I think we need to get back to that. And so if the plan, and if the desire in the village is to have that, it's certainly my desire, I'd like to see that included. Okay? So now I'm going to get to some specifics on your plan that I do think you should look back at. Well, I want to give you another kudo, and that is identify and prioritize infilling existing gaps in the sidewalk network. Thank you for including that. There's a few in the village that frustrate me. Develop a bicycle and pedestrian master plan. Yes, and I will volunteer, Elise, if you need a committee to do something like that. Put me
It's
down.
happening next year, so.
Now, here's something I'm going to be critical of. Public Works, this is on page 48 in our handout. It says, I'm not aware, and I believe it's your language as the author, I'm not aware of any needs or plans to expand the Public Works building. And I personally object to that language in a plan because that's a simple question that should be able to be answered by Jeff Rao. So,
Yeah, I will say that list, something Lauren and Jeff just haven't had an opportunity to
Okay.
go through and kind of
Okay.
revise. So yeah, that's definitely on our list of things to clarify before we get
in
further
that
in the draft.
same area, and again, I've got it marked as page 48, so.
Okay.
There's a, I think it's a chart, and the last item is schools. I'll give you a minute to see if you can get to it. So it's 48 in our packet.
Okay, just gotta figure-
Sorry, it's 130 in my packet, but page 48 in the report. Yeah, I
Okay.
think you're getting close.
Yep,
There you
I
go.
got it.
Down at the bottom, there's schools. And the schools, I can't read it from here, but the village is some boilerplate language.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I want to know, I mean, I know that the school district has plans. We've got a site for a new school.
Mm-hmm.
I think that language should be included in this. Particularly if I'm a community member reading this, I kind of want to know what the vision is. Does that make sense?
Yep, definitely, yeah, and you know, we're meeting with the school district, you know, on an ongoing basis. I know there's a meeting
Right,
tomorrow
but I know
too,
they've
yeah,
articulated
making
a
sure we-
vision.
Right.
Can't that be integrated into this plan?
Yeah, yeah.
Somewhat.
Yeah, making sure we get dates and things like that, right, you know, in terms of the years they're aiming for at this point too.
Okay.
But yeah, great point.
Action items, great list, but there's nothing about trees. I'm gonna harp on that a little bit. Climate, Appendix A, climate change and rising temperatures, good data. Again, I'll say trees can help. And the statement at the bottom of the page endorses what I've just said, right? So I'd like to see a little more on that. And then, oh, a few other things, sorry. Page 42. So that would be, if you follow your page numbers there's a statement about the village hall that has the village hall still located downtown. That needs to be updated. And I have on mine page 42 and page 196 of the packet, so.
Probably.
There's a couple of renumbering things in this,
Oh, the appendix.
so it could be a different 42.
Yeah, I think that's just in the appendix. So it's got it, the page numbers start over.
Village Hall, that might be it. Yeah, Village Hall is located at 117 Spring Street. Your plan's already dated,
Thanks, yeah.
right?
Yeah, I should have clarified too that there were a lot of the appendix, those details are specifically still going through a fine tooth with
Okay.
staff, but that's one we could have.
So
caught for
another
sure.
one I'm
Yeah.
going to just call out then is the list of private sector employees, employers. And I understand that's from Wisconsin Development and Workforce Development, 2021, but I'm looking at it and it's like, where's Tyce? Where's all color powder coating, right? So I think looking at that list is important.
There were a couple on there I didn't recognize, so I don't know if it's erroneous data or.
Yeah, one I didn't recognize and I Googled it and it's out in it's north of here. It's not in the village, so.
Okay, we'll check on it a little closer.
All right, this one may be out in left field for you, but in your action plan, it's wonderful language. This plan only has value if used. Agree 100%. My question is it out of the scope of your assignment, your contract, to assess the effectiveness of village communication practices? I don't know the answer to that, but that's the question I brought up. And maybe it's something that's total separate from this planning, but I think as something we should be doing in the village is questioning how good are we at getting information out? Is the website good enough? Are there other methods? So, and then my last item, I would love to look at it just to hear from you, but it's the MAP A, the Urban Heat Index, which was really interesting. And so my first question is, how was this data collected? And then do you have any thoughts on what you would attribute as the causes for these heat islands? Because as I looked at them, I mean, obviously parking lots, areas without trees, but, there's residential neighborhoods. I couldn't find kind of a cause. And so I'm curious as a planner,
Yeah.
what your thoughts are.
I had some detailed notes on this as well, from a handful of months ago that I would like to revisit and then get you a more accurate answer.
Okay.
I
Great.
agree, because especially like in the northeast corner, that's where I live.
Yeah.
And there's a big park. I mean, 30% of that is park across the middle. And that's some of the hottest areas.
Yeah, I can dig
And
into
how
that
was the
more.
data gathered?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, just like initially looking at this, I'm not necessarily even thinking about what areas are most paved, but just tree cover. So like, the Viridian parcel, Jimlee's, like it's not developed at the moment, but it's just farm field. So yeah, I'd be curious to see how this was collected. But curious, I mean, that's just kind of what I see in like downtown. We mentioned tree cover. A lot of these neighborhoods don't have street trees. That was kind of in the era where we didn't require street trees in the terrace. That's a change we made probably 3-4 years ago for new development to have the terrace trees. But yeah, some of these neighborhoods and like, the dense condo development here, kind of all along with the, kind of following Foxborough. That would be my initial thought, but yeah, would love to see some more notes on that.
So that's the end of my comments till we get to chickens and bees.
Oh, good.
Good feedback, thank you.
And by the way, you did all this with only one typo, which was pretty impressive.
Oh, wow, good.
Thank you. That was awesome. Anybody else?
Also on the list is the conversation about the library, and there obviously is quickly evolving just up the street from here. So, and then I noticed on the existing land use map. Lots of parcels that are either have been recently built on or are being built on that should get updated, given this is a 20-year plan. We want to get it as current as we can, at the date of
Yeah.
adoption anyway, so there's.
Yeah, I know that's
Number
one
of
thing
parcels
Leanne's
to-
kind of working on, double checking building permits
Yeah.
and things like that to make sure we catch that, and then we'll probably do a final check around October, November, see if any other changes
Yeah,
have happened in the
update
last
that.
few months.
Yep.
Another thing that caught me bewildered a little bit as I thought about it, there are more references in here than I could have counted to traditional neighborhood design. I certainly have my idea of what that is and agree with many of the concepts of that as I understand it, but it's referenced in here so many times that I think we should probably have a definition and outlining that a little bit. And there probably are some principles that you might find in some person's definition of traditional neighborhood design that maybe we shouldn't push so hard. And, do we want every development to be garnered by, by those principles? Because it certainly suggests it in so many places in there. And again, I'm not saying I'm against most of those principles, but we probably should define them better and, and make it clear that not every neighborhood has to be of that flavor.
Yeah, I remember that was one thing that I noticed as well, and I thought, is this, how is this defined later on? So I think this is the section, it's page 54 of the plan, page 136 of the packet. Integrated diversity of high-quality housing types to accommodate a variety of lifestyles, each group's financial capability, long-term preservation of community character, high quality of life, housing parks. So I think the idea is it's neighborhoods that have a variety of housing types, they have parks, they have commercial businesses, and they're well connected, so
But
typically more.
if you Google it, which I did, just to see, is there a very standard definition? I found lots of hits to that Google request, and lots of little factoid sheets and such, and different ones had different things included, so.
Yeah, establishing principles include establishing community gathering places, providing housing variety, advance equity inclusion, blend land uses, promote walkability, connectivity, calm traffic, attractive and active streetscapes, highlight natural areas, incorporate public health and sustainability, and high quality design. So maybe we can all kind of take a closer look through all those and decide if that's something.
Yeah,
if
and
there's
they'll
anything
go
we
on
wanna
to,
add.
you have to have front porches, you have to put your garage off an alley loaded from the rear, and, those are nice things to have, but I don't think they have to be in every, every
Yeah.
development.
Yeah,
so.
I see like some note here about prohibit cul-de-sacs and dead ends except in places where environmental features or topography requires them. That might be stronger language than we want, so maybe that's, we could say maybe reduce cul-de-sacs where possible and promote, a connected network of streets or something. One saving grace, of course, this was before my time, but most of you were here with Highlands and Netherwood neighborhood is it's a circuitous road, but there is a fairly straight trail through the middle of that neighborhood and providing another way for people to kind of get from A to B rather than getting in their car and driving twice as far. But I definitely feel like that type of neighborhood is sort of unlikely to get approved, at least by CARPC, in the way that was a couple years ago. That's kind of what we've heard.
Another item, there was a couple references in here to Prairie Mountain Cemetery. I'm wondering if we have a little minor math as to the current capacity and how many years till we fill that out at our current use. It's kind of been boxed in already as far as expansion growth, but sort of a unique use that we still need, so.
Good stuff. Anybody else?
I would just add that I was happy to see some concern and verbiage here that would consider the park system and improving the equity and the dispersal of it and looking at conservation acres to be looked at and planned around and with. And I went to focus group, I went to public meeting, and that was the main thing that was talked about at our tables that had to do with that. I think that working on that is a long-term issue, and it requires money. It takes some land out of development, but I think in the long term, the quality of the community, what it looks like, and what is here 50 years from now is going to make a lot of difference on what we're doing right now with that.
Anyone else? The only question I had is, can you go back to the land use categories again? I just want to wrap my head around the neighborhood office and business you've combined into neighborhood mixed use. And when I see mixed use, I think of a residential and commercial component in that. Is that the expectation that these two would have the opportunity to have residential in them? And the same thing with the planned mixed use and the central mixed use. Those are commercial districts, not so much the central mixed use, but planned business, planned office, and planned mixed use have been combined into just planned mixed use.
Good question, and yes, the intent is to have some ability to do residential there. I think, again, the idea is trends of development moving towards neighborhoods where you can live close to work, or where you might have office that's mixed in with residential. They're not necessarily incompatible uses. So on major commercial corridors where it might have just been office or business, allowing for the flexibility to consider residential in more close proximity.
But it's not a mandatory requirement for there to be that
Correct.
in there.
Correct.
My only fear is, having done this in a lot of communities myself, when I see mixed use, it would be confusing it's confusing. Mixed use to me always means the combination. So if I'm looking for a business use, I don't really see one. A commercial use.
I'm just reading through the neighborhood mixed use description.
Could it just be neighborhood commercial? Because the densities that you're talking about for residential would be higher density uses, which would be a commercial use. Multifamily is a commercial.
Commercial
use.
from a
Yeah.
tax and value
Correct.
perspective, but not from the land use context that we're describing throughout the plan.
Okay.
I guess maybe the
Well, who are we-
conversation is,
okay,
do we
then-
want to have business only, so that we have, like, industrial districts, for example, would be business only, but in other areas, are we open to a mix of businesses and commercial, or sorry, and residential, considering residential, multifamily to be residential?
So maybe that gets at the crux of the problem is two things. One, who is this being written for? Is it being written for commercial people or developers who want to understand the comprehensive plan to go to the zoning? And then is there a meshing of the text in our zoning laws to this? Does that make sense?
To make
Because
sure that
when
they
When I
match.
do this, in my professional life, when I do this, I go to the comprehensive plan to see how things are going or what the expectation is. I check it against the zoning plan, and if I'm seeing neighborhood mixed use, I'm thinking something completely different than if I'm looking at a zoning text that may not have it
Right.
spelled out that way.
Yep, it's mixes of uses in a neighborhood, not a requirement for a building to contain a mix of uses.
Okay, so then who is this being written for?
The community as a whole, for encouraging neighborhoods that achieve these goals that we've been talking about generally. So more affordable housing within close proximity to commercial, office, employment, retail. And the zoning, the text contains a list of compatible zoning districts. in that land use category. So you could pursue an MR8 zoning district or a neighborhood office zoning district, for example.
Still struggling with mixed use.
Can you go to map 5A, future land use?
Do you have a page number in the packet?
I don't, because I imported it into my, so it's very near the end.
Okay. I'll just start from the back and work. my way
There it
up.
is.
Okay.
5A, the Highway 138 interchange area, you've got a deep dark purple designation, which on my plan does not exist in the legend over to the side.
Okay, that
But
should be
there
the
is a category called interchange mixed use, which is kind of supposed to be a salmon color. And if you go to the next map, it does indeed show it that salmon color, so I think there was just a,
Yep, I noticed that in
Mix up there.
preparing as well. It's correct on 5B, but we'll update 5A.
I'd like to just step back to Larry's comment about parks. And there's a statement in the plan that says, design neighborhoods to be within a quarter mile of a public park, which sounds like a wonderful statement. My question is there any data or maps that show where we're currently at?
Yes, I believe those service area maps are all in the draft park and recreation plan.
I'm thinking something visual with, for every park, that you draw a radius around it.
Yep,
Do we have something like that?
Yeah.
And could that be maybe referenced in this plan or included
I think so.
in
Yeah.
the appendix? I think it'd be helpful.
Does that include like pocket parks, like they did in the Viridian development?
Yeah.
You know,
so
tiny things?
They're called mini parks or neighborhood parks here. Pocket parks. But yeah, so that lighter green kind of radius goes around some of the smaller parks. That's a quarter mile, showing the areas of service, and then the half mile is that darker green buffer around all the parks.
Nice.
Anybody else? All right.
Really good feedback. Thanks for going through it in detail. We'll address those and work on a draft 2 with staff and then come back here.
Moving on to 7F then, review and consider recommendations to the village board regarding proposed zoning text amendments presented by Sonia from Van de Wall and Associates. I guess, I apologize, I don't know if some of this stuff had been gone. We didn't go through some of this, or maybe I missed it. What I'm, specifically the driveway paved setback areas, I don't know if I,
I can give a little background, I guess, before Sonia jumps in. And this is essentially a running list that Jeff and I largely have worked on over the last couple of years of just things that we felt either need to be updated, and a couple of these are recommendations from the Affordable Housing Report. Last year, I think it was last fall, I had a couple different memos in front of the Planning Commission and then the board that were sort of a short-term, mid-term, and long-term zoning text changes. A lot of those mid and longer term were things from the Affordable Housing Report, but things that we expected would kind of be easier to achieve after the comp plan was updated and adopted. So those are still kind of on the back burner until we get through the comp plan to make sure that all the language works together. And like you mentioned, that there's correlating, zoning districts for these new land use categories and everything. So this is just all the low-hanging fruit, the short-term stuff. So this isn't, a complete list of all of the text amendments that we want to see over the next few years. But, so I don't think anything has really changed from that list, that memo that I did last year. But some of these were carryovers. Obviously, we haven't really talked about chickens and bees for a long time. That was one of the first things that Mike Grace handed me when I started. And then we had COVID and he's like, ah, forget about it. We'll get back to it eventually. Fence height, things like that. There's a lot of clarifications that we've just noticed the zoning code is a little unclear, and so providing more clear language for folks. What was the one, John, that you mentioned, the driveway paved surface setback? So sounds like in the past, there was a 3-foot paved surface setback from side property lines, and then it moved to 5. And we've discussed this, and again, it's up for discussion, so if you guys feel strongly about 5 feet, we can kind of, talk about that and decide if we want to push it forward, but we have a lot more folks that have campers, boats, trailers, things like that, trying to find a place to store them on their property, and we felt that 3 feet was sufficient for, mower width and kind of, providing that separation of use, so you don't feel like all of a sudden the camper's overhanging onto neighbor's property. We felt like 3 feet was probably sufficient. So we asked Vanderwall to kind of take this list and then look at, other codes that they've written. What would they recommend to kind of modernize our code or clean up some of this language so it's a little bit more easy to understand?
We went to the 5 feet for snow storage, so that you're not shoveling or blowing your snow and stacking it on your neighbor's property. And also potential drainage issues when you're paving a slab alongside your garage, 3 feet from the property, and now you're dumping water, potentially or probably on your neighbor's property. In a new construction situation or, a new planned neighborhood, these sorts of things can be worked out. But when you change the code and somebody on ABC Street says, oh, now I can get some concrete alongside my garage, they may create a drainage issue for their neighbor.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's, other ways in permitting to control that, but that's why we went to the 5 feet, was to avoid those sort of things.
Yeah, that's helpful. I will say that we've gotten concerns about paving and drainage and all that with the 5-foot setback, so I'm not sure if, like you said, maybe something else is needed to talk about, most people don't really understand though how water either flows on the property or how it was meant to flow, and then, they do some landscaping and everything kind of gets rearranged. They put in retaining walls. That's, one area with Public Works we've talked about. You
The
can
other
create
thing,
this language.
too,
How do you
is
enforce it?
On the 3 versus 5 feet, and this gets to the zoning text and the engineering side of things, when you put a flare on your driveway, what is the engineering requirements? Is the flare an 18-inch flare? Is it 3 feet? Is it 5 feet? It depends. If it's bigger than 3 feet and you move the pavement requirement to 3 feet, you can have, or if it's at 5 feet and you allow people to go to 3 feet, you're gonna have flares that run into each other.
Okay.
So you need to double check what the village standard is for flares. It also, in 3 feet, if you allow them to put a living fence instead of just a typical kind of fence for changes between zoning uses. Sometimes that 3 feet isn't enough for things to live, depending upon the grade change. So 5 feet gives you a little bit more flexibility with that. So that was the driveway paving setback one. The family definition, I want to just kind of touch on this. I think it's a well-intended and a good thing to do. I just want to, what I don't want to create is a slippery slope where people can take advantage of an intention where the application is different. So I think that what we're trying to get at is the right thing to do. I just want to make sure that there's not some loophole or something that people can just take advantage of. So just, I don't know who needs to look at that closely or what, or if it's something that has been used in other municipalities as a litmus test.
Yep.
Can look into that.
I will
I'll let
say,
Patrick get into the chickens
Well,
and bees.
well, I'm not ready for the chickens and bees. I respect both of what you guys said about the 5 feet, but if we want to encourage density, something's got to go. And I'd be more in favor of the 3 feet than the 5 feet. to allow for potentially more density?
Um,
I
Is
think
there
the
a way
place-
to, you know, bracket that with, you know, plans for drainage, you know, so that you're putting that slab in and you're not, most of the side yards between houses are designed as a drainage swale, and somebody all of a sudden has room for a concrete slab there, they're going to dam up the drainage, almost certainly, if somehow there isn't a requirement to maintain that drainage swale. So
Yeah,
maybe there's a way to
making sure
do
that
3
that kind
feet
of
where conditions
supersedes-
will allow, you
right.
know, and drainage can be met.
And I would definitely, again, check it against what we have for our village standard for curb cuts.
Another item I'll bring up that's not on your list, and we did one tonight, the CSMs to divide zero lot line duplexes. I've had a couple of conversations with both Jeff Rao and Tony, our building inspector. I think our current zoning code says that those units, if they're divided, have to have the proper firewall all the way up to the roof sheeting, but there's not really a system where that gets checked and verified. Currently, the Uniform Dwelling Code requires that, so if you're building it as a zero line duplex, you have to go through some significant steps to make it that. But if you build it as a normal duplex and 2 months later go through the CSM process, you can kind of backdoor yourself into a zero lot line without following the intentions of the building code.
Yeah.
So there may be something in these zoning text amendments that we maybe try to deal with that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We've talked, I mean, for the last couple of years about just how do we work better with building inspection, fire department, our process to just make sure that those things don't kind of fall through the cracks or, yeah, just things that we would typically overlook and not the details that we would see at planning commission, but try not to create more problems than we're solving. So I don't know if you wanted to go through these one by
Well, I don't
one,
know if
or,
we're
you
there
know,
or not.
if there's other ones that you guys want to, we certainly, you know, aren't gonna come back yet with like specific ordinance language. I think we need to look into a couple more of these and Jeff and I can look into a little bit more the drainage and we can talk to Tony too, but any other ones that you think are great? We mentioned chickens and bees. Do we
Well,
wanna?
I don't know where we
go to
are in that discussion, where you wanna go. I got probably 3 things I wanna bring up about the language, I guess. So
Yeah.
the first one would be, is a language thing, and this is regulations for chickens and beekeeping. So you're further down, yes, you get into that red write-up. And it's, regulations 1FI, I guess, or 1F1. Okay, and it says, the fence of a run, so I think we're a second or third sentence on that. The fence of a run shall be of sufficient opacity or webbing. And I question if opacity is the right word on that.
Maybe more size?
I wrote material. So I just highlight that word and think about if that's what you want, because I don't know what that really means. I mean, I know what opacity means and how you're using it, but I just don't know if that's the right word.
Right. I'm not sure if it's that a chicken doesn't fit or it's not strong enough to contain
I
a
don't know.
chicken.
But anyhow, that's just one thing I brought up, but my bigger questions are this. How is the village going to deal with existing residents who have chickens? Okay. Second thing, what about ducks and geese? Because I know that it exists in the village. So be prepared to address that. Is it poultry rather than chickens? I don't know what the answer is, but I just wanted to bring that up. And then my third thing with respect to beekeeping is, why is beekeeping not allowed in commercial and industrial areas? There's like a chart, I think that, this
Yeah.
blue chart, and it looks like it's excluded. And the reason I bring it up is I have a friend that has a business, and her hives are out on commercial buildings out by Truax. which I always thought was kind of odd, but she says it's a very effective area to put the bees. So I think we should look at that, maybe in including that. And then one last thing from me, and that has to do with fences. Will existing fences be grandfathered? I'm assuming the answer is yes to that.
Yep.
Okay.
We're not gonna have anybody pulling out their fence. I was just looking to see, there was one other change with the fencing that I know Jeff and I have talked about, but I'm not sure if it made it onto the,
Yeah, my specific issue on that was the setback changes.
yep. The side,
Right.
yep. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, the street side yard. So for, let's say, just our standard SR4, single family zoning district, that's, 85% of the homes in the village. They have a 30-foot front and street side yard setback. So, especially in some of these newer neighborhoods, these lots are not very wide. And so people that have a corner lot really don't have a lot of space to work with once you go 30 feet in from the street side yard. I live on a corner property, there's space in my yard that I'm not using in a fenced-in area, because of this too. I think the original intent, and some of you may have been here when we went through this change, I think the original intent of having the fence back from the sidewalk is, one, not to kind of, to feel more of like this small town village welcoming feel if you're not walking right up against like a prison wall of a 6-foot, privacy fence right along the sidewalk, and also for, just protected with, if a dog is in the fenced-in yard, maybe you have a chain link fence that, you're not walking along or maybe there's a small child walking along and they're poking their fingers in the fence. There's some buffer between, the uses within the fence and the sidewalk. And again, just feels more welcoming. Jeff and I kind of felt like 10 feet was probably sufficient to meet those goals of safety and welcoming feel. That's just sort of a number that we agreed on. So happy to, if you all think that's appropriate, but I think this would allow, a lot of people don't want a fence in their whole yard just because fencing is expensive, or they maybe have a smaller dog or something, they just want to have a little bit of privacy. Maybe they just put up a fence on one side. So, but I could certainly see some people, especially in these, again, newer neighborhoods that are smaller corner lots, they're trying to take advantage of the most space they can to use, and they have a lot of unused space then outside of that fenced-in area that's just mowed but not really, serving their family needs.
I don't like the 10 feet. I'd like to be as close as possible. The dog thing is something I never thought about, but, I would err on being closer to the lot line than further away.
Okay, so like 5 feet?
3 to 5.
How about setback is equal to the height of the fence?
I like that too, I
You
thought.
got a
That's kind of how
3-foot
we,
fence,
that's
you're
how
back
we
3
treat,
feet. If you got a
that's how we
6-foot fence, you're back
treat,
6 feet.
signs, right? Signs are, the setback from the right of way is the height of the sign, and it can be limited to, 6 feet.
Gives a better scale,
6
human
feet high.
scale for people walking down the sidewalk.
Right.
Okay, we could look at what that language could look like.
I've got a question on the variances, and this is probably more of a clarification than anything. I thought that there were some rules that we couldn't allow variances. Am I just got a faulty memory, or?
Specifically the use variance? Is that what you're-
Probably.
Yeah. That was always my understanding in operation too, that we should not be approving a use variance. That essentially, I think what this language does is it clarifies, like, in absence of any reasonable use of the property, or to allow a principal land use not listed in the zoning district for the subject property where none of the allowed principal land uses can be reasonably established. So they'd have to prove 0 viable use for any of the uses listed. I think this is an update to reflect some changes in state statute. So I will dig into exactly where that's coming from, but that's what it says now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last thing was the signs. And I think that the way that's described in the text makes sense. But I think that that is sort of the trigger point for our favorite topic, and that is the encompassing sign ordinance.
Supreme Court.
Yeah, so, you guys might remember when we did the new Quick Trip, site plan near the Prairie Brook Apartments. We did chatted with Manuel, but did some fancy math to try to get their sign. They ultimately kind of scaled down their signs, but, ended up counting, they had, that kind of LED stripe running along the canopy, plus some Quick Trip wording on the canopy, plus the wall signs, plus the monument signs. So monument signs in its own category, but we don't have this fuel canopy category within the sign code, and so ultimately we decided the fairest thing to do would be to count, kind of look at the east side of the site, west, north, south, and then say, okay, add up the wall sign, the width of the stripe, and then any kind of Quick Trip lettering on the canopy, and count that all towards the total square footage for the wall sign. So it was kind of clunky, and I don't think maybe, I don't know if it really met our, well, I mean, I'm sure it'll look nice, but it was just inefficient and maybe not the fairest way to be adding these. And I don't know, this is the first gas station we've probably built in a while, so I'm not sure how often it's gonna come up, but,
Well, it also gets back to the whole menu board thing and the signage that happened on the hotel.
Culvers, and, yeah.
Is a menu board a piece of signage?
I think we gotta be careful, when we wrote the sign code, we were early in the communities that did that, and Mike Slavny, and worked a lot with Matt Dregney on the Supreme Court's definition, limitations on signage. And when you say fueling price signs, you're being specific, and we tried to leave the sign code you couldn't regulate the information on the sign. You could call it a wall sign or a monument sign, or
Right.
I think fuel station canopy sign describes where the sign is, but it doesn't describe
What's
the message of the sign.
Yeah.
But when you say fuel price signs, I think we're crossing a boundary there.
Yeah, I think fuel price signs are specifically protected by statute. They're allowed to have certain signage for price. So maybe that's a carve out, but fueling station canopy, I can see how that would be an issue.
I would double check with Matt on that one before you draft that, because the sign code took a long time because we couldn't call things what they were, because we were, the signs can't be regulated by their content.
Right.
And that's
Or
kind of
maybe
what we're
it's
doing
just-
when we say fuel price signs.
right, or maybe fueling station canopy signs is just canopy
Which
signs.
is why you have to pull out a thesaurus on our zoning text.
No,
Yeah.
a fuel station canopy sign, I think, that just describes where it is. It doesn't describe what it says. It can say
Right.
Quick Trip, it can say
Got it.
donuts, it can say, whatever. It just describes where it is, just like, building
Locations.
signs and monument signs.
Okay.
But anything you do to the sign code, I definitely would run by Matt, because of all the efforts that we've made to try to keep our sign code legal and enforceable, and not, after lunch favor for the Supreme Court.
Yeah, for sure. No, all super helpful comments. This is just sort of the first attempt at, this has been on my to-do list forever. We've had such busy planning commission meetings. It's been really easy to just push this one off, but I think a couple of these need to get addressed or cleaned up, or we have residents that have kind of been asking, what's the changes here? So hopefully we can kind of take some of these back, look at them a little further. We'll go through them probably at a staff meeting too with Matt and Derek, and see if there's any that they want to tweak, and then bring it back to you guys with a little bit
So we'll just
cleaner
move,
suggestions.
just move on in the agenda, then just don't make a motion.
No
to the
action, yeah, it was
board.
just a review of the, memo, but yeah, I would not recommend to the village board this time.
And I didn't mean to cut anybody off. If anybody else has something else you wanted to add? No? All right. Then we will move on with the agenda. Item 8A is the status of the development projects. If anybody wants to hear Elise talk about in a Jeff voice. Anybody?
Lauren can give any street utility projects, updates. Borough looks good.
Yeah, sure. All right, so yeah, we do have kind of three major projects ongoing. The first is South Borough Avenue, the second is, of course, Janesville Street, and then we've got our State and Washington Street projects going. As of yesterday, South Borough Avenue is paved fully, so it is at what we would call final completion. There's some cleanup work that has to be done. We did walk the project site with that contractor today, and they are going to be working on that over the next week. So we should finally be bringing that small but very extended project to a close, so that'll be nice. County is continuing to work on Janesville Street. They are moving as quickly as they can to get out of the Spring Street intersection. We've gotten, of course, a lot of calls and questions about that, including, strangely enough, from some 7-year-olds that my daughter knows, so everyone is watching us on that one, and we know that. So they are moving to final grading early next week, which typically precedes kind of that first coat of asphalt. So we're crossing our fingers, they're gonna get that concrete work done and at least get it open to traffic, even if they don't do final paving until they kind of finish up the rest of the project. So they are, like I said, going as fast as they can, and we hope we'll have some good news on that soon. State and Washington just kind of continue to be normal reconstruction projects, so very impactful to those that live on those streets, hopefully a little less impactful regionally. They are working their way through the underground utilities on State Street right now, hoping to get that done by probably the end of August, and then they'll move on to Washington Street. Still looking at about an early to mid-October completion date there, assuming that the weather doesn't do anything really wild. So generally on budget, generally on schedule, and we know that it's frustrating, and we just really appreciate the fact that the residents have really worked with us well on this and been communicative, but also very understanding.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Upcoming planning commission meetings, September 7th and October 5th. Put it on your calendars, they will be here. Planning staff meeting agenda from July 19th, it's in your packet. If anybody wants to review or anybody's question. All right, nothing for the items on future meetings, and I will take a motion to adjourn.
Before we do that, I have one request. I like working digitally with the iPad, that we're saving a lot of paper, but it would really help me if I could have a printed agenda. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but is that something possible for future meetings? Just the agenda, that's all I need, just so I can kind of
Check
track
them
it
off.
as we're going
We
on.
usually have them on the table, but maybe if they had.
You want it ahead of time, so you
No, no, just at the meeting, just so I can, because it's hard to go back and forth. Thank you.
Especially when it's a couple hundred pages.
Yeah. So with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Do we have a second? And we have a second by Larry. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you, everybody. Have a good month.